Welcome back to another coaching moment. I'm Luke Iorio. This week we're going to talk about how to manage those catabolic relationships, meaning some of those more difficult, challenging relationships that you may have. By catabolic, what we mean are those individuals that tend to focus on those things that are just not quite right in their life, those types of things that are really challenging to them and maybe holding them back, those types of areas where they're very drained because they don't feel like they have any power to make changes to their circumstances. They tend to gripe, to complain. They tend to be very, very draining to you. And so it's not all that surprising that you may want to take a look at changing this type of relationship. Because when you're in this type of an environment or these type of circumstances, one way to handle it is to simply be a victim to it. Meaning to say, hey, I don't have any power to this type of circumstance, I can't change it. But you're not saying that, you're saying that you do want to manage it. And so that gives you a couple of choices. Certainly you can put out there a very direct intention of how you want to change the nature of that relationship. We're going to talk about that in just one moment. But in addition to directly trying to change it, you can take a look at changing your perspective of it as well. So you can start to shift that perspective to say, hey, what if this relationship was in my life for this reason? Meaning you're starting to reframe what it is that you're getting out of it. You may look at this relationship as something that holds a lesson for you to learn, something that you can be taught by this other individual. So that's shifting your perspective of it perhaps. You can also take a look at accepting it, meaning that it is what it is, and that's okay. Now we're not talking about not wanting to change it because you don't feel like you have any power. You're talking about not wanting to change it because you know what? This person simply is who they are, and that's all right. Their journey is their journey, my journey is mine, and I'm going to be just simply okay with that. I'm not going to try to deny what is, and that's all right. In and of itself, just having that acceptance gives you a different way of being able to look at that given relationship. One other way is to just simply, truly leave that relationship, which might be one of the choices that you've taken a look at as to whether or not you can reasonably, literally avoid or leave that relationship and go in a new direction. But what most people choose to do is some form of change, whether it's changing perspective or specifically change the nature of that relationship. And in doing so, there's a couple of things to keep in mind. Number one is to change any relationship. You've got to recognize that initially, if you've come to this point, you're the one with the buy-in, you're the one with the agenda, you're the one with the goal to change the relationship. If that other individual is not bought in, is not engaged to the fact that, hey, maybe something isn't working real well, maybe I could be putting myself out there in a better manner that's more positive and more supportive of people around me, if they haven't come to that realization, they don't see a need to change. And so one of the very first things that is important about changing the nature of any relationship is to take a look at gaining buy-in. So you know you're bought into changing. How might the other person be bought in? So to truly understand what their perspective is, to recognize why might they want to change? What are some of the benefits to them? To help recognize what are some of the costs of currently how they might be behaving or acting or communicating. Because they've got to be able to see what are some of those negatives as well as what are some of those positives, the pros and the cons, to making some form of change for themselves. And so once you start to recognize what their buy-in might be, the second part is then having that type of a conversation. So to recognize how you might want to set up that challenging conversation so that you can start to bring a level of awareness to that other individual. To ask them some questions, to acknowledge and validate, to allow them to be okay with the fact that, hey, things are where they are, but what might this be costing you? What might this be costing you in the way other people perceive you, the types of relationships that you have? What's some of the just stress that you take on right now that maybe you don't need to? And what would be some of the benefits of leaving that behind? So that they can start to get clear on what type of change they want to make. The key as part of this process is to be very compassionate, to be very concerned, to release as much judgment as possible. Because if that person feels like you're trying to change them because you're judging them, you don't like them or otherwise, they're going to shut down. Their resistance is going to come up. So you've got to be aware of that and to be truly in it for their agenda as well. To be truly supportive of helping them achieve something that might be better for themselves. And if they're not ready for that yet, you have to take it a step at a time. You have to work on building that buy-in. It always begins there. As part of this whole process, even as part of the change process, or whether you're just accepting of the situation as it is, remember to also always be you. Don't entrain to who they are. Don't begin to jump into the box, to buy into whatever their story is, to begin to commiserate, to complain and to vent with them. Instead, be you. Be the individual that looks for the solution, that looks to move things forward, that looks for some type of a positive outlook, be authentic in how you rationalize or otherwise. And so make sure that you put your best self into the process, because what you do is about you. How they receive it, how they interpret it, is entirely about them. As long as you put your best foot forward, you think through that, and you do so out of care and concern for the other person and not just your own agenda, now all of a sudden you're giving yourself the best chance at success in managing, let alone changing, the nature of some of those relationships. I wish you the best of luck.